Now, you know that the concept is relatively simple. It's just that whatever key you're in, you number the notes of the scale, and the chord corresponds to the number. So if you're in the key of C, and you have a C scale, then every note gets numbered. Really, we wouldn't use the 8. And then we would refer to the C chord as the 1 chord, the F chord as the 4 chord, the G chord as the 5 chord. This is pretty basic stuff, and I think you're all familiar with that. The difference, the thing to understand about this, because musicians everywhere talk about 1, 4, and 5, and a 2 chord, and a 6 chord, and so forth. That's not something that's unique to Nashville. What's unique to Nashville is the way that this stuff is notated, the way that it's written. And what's really wonderful about this book, he does go into the theory. There's a pretty detailed explanation of what's behind it. But what I love about it is that he has a disc, really a DVD, that goes with it. You can pop that into your computer. And there are charts for every one of the songs. But what he did was he had 6 different people write the chart. So, for example, for this song, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different versions of the chart for the same song, written by 6 different people. And the point of that was to demonstrate just how much variation there is in what people do. The theory concept doesn't change. A 1 chord is a 1 chord, a 5 chord is a 5 chord, but the way that people notate these things will change. And understanding that is important because there are things that are standard and there are things that aren't. And where this is the most important is when you're in a session environment or when you're working with studio musicians, even if you're not in a studio really, because this stuff happens live too. But virtually any session musician in Nashville reads these charts. It's pretty much the standard, and the system was developed in the 50s and 60s as just a convenient way of working with vocalists. So the leader would write a chart, session leader, and let's say the singer wanted to try it in a lower key. Well, rather than having to rewrite the entire chart in a new key, if you had it in numbers, then the musicians will just think of the scale and can just plug in the notes. So it's a whole lot simpler than having to sit there and cross things out or look at one letter and think of another one. And it's also, I know the way that I hear is absolutely related to this, because what we're really dealing with is not just some mathematical abstraction, but we're dealing with a sound. We're dealing with the fact that a 1 chord sounds like home, that a 5 chord generally brings you back home. I grabbed my guitar, but the piano's closer. So if I'm in the key of C, and that's home, and then I go like this. I'm clearly not finished. A 5 chord wants to resolve and wants to return back home. So there's a particular sound that chord has, and when you learn to identify what each one of those sounds is, we were talking about this yesterday, with just the idea of you're putting names to sounds. A 1, 2, or 3 is a particular sound. 4, 5, 4, 1 over 3, 2 minor, and 1. So you can learn to differentiate in your ear the difference between, say, for example, a 1, 4, 1, and a 1, 2, 1. They're just different sounds, different tonal colors, and then it becomes, it ceases to be math. Then it becomes music, because you can listen to something, and like, for example, when I have to learn a new song for a gig or whatever it is, or something I just want to learn, I generally am not learning it with an instrument in my hands first. I'm just listening and picking up on what those relationships are and getting that in my head. Because, say, if I'm going to sing the song, maybe I don't know what key I'm going to sing it in. So I want to have in my head what those relationships are, and then I can try whatever key. Or I can try different capo positions, which is something that I want to get into, which is why I brought those out. So it's an important skill to have from the listening perspective, and then from the perspective of somebody who might be going into a studio to record material and might have other musicians that you need to communicate these things to. Since most players in Nashville that do session work with number charts, it's something that you want to have some familiarity with. The basic difference between a number chart and regular music notation, aside from the fact that we're using numbers instead of letters, is that we don't use measures. There's no bar lines. You don't indicate beats with quarter notes and half notes, or even with slashes. Like, you might see something like this in a standard chart. Which would just be 4 counts of a C chord, 4 counts of an F chord, 4 counts of a G chord, and so forth, right? In the number system, we don't bother with the slashes, we don't bother with the bar lines. We would just say key of C, and generally that's in a circle at the upper left. And then you might just see this, where each number signifies a measure. So that's 4 counts of C, 4 counts of F, 4 counts of G, and back to 4 counts of C. It's really pretty simple. One of the first gigs that I did when I got to town, I was asked to fill in with a band I'd never played with before on the guitar. I didn't know most of the songs. Yes?
What if it's shorter, though, or longer? What if there's more counts?
I'm getting to that.
Okay.
I was asked to fill in. I did not know the songs. The bass player was calling out chord changes to me, but instead of saying it's a C, it's a D, like, say the song would start and he would say the intro is 1451. And at first I'm, wait, what does he mean? And then I realized that that was what he meant. A 1 chord, a 4 chord, a 5 chord, a 1 chord. It's a very convenient shorthand. Now, Zach, you asked a really good question. How do you indicate when there are more beats or fewer beats? Now, if you're in a different meter, like if you were in 3, you would literally just write in 3. And that now every one of those is 3 counts instead of 4, or in 2. Or sometimes people will actually write the time signature, but more frequently you'll see in 2, in 3, in 4. But something else that happens is you'll see things like this. Where those 2 dots indicate beats, or they might be slashes. It might look like this. And what that means is we have 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Pretty simple. And this is very, very, very common. Or let's say, for example, you have multiple chords in the same measure. Like, what if it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4? Then we get this. And the underline indicates that these 2 chords happen in the same measure. We would assume that it's 2 counts each because there's nothing telling us otherwise. But it might be different. Maybe it's 3 counts on one and 1 on another. Maybe it's this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Or something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Well, there's a couple of ways that might be indicated. Some people would just do this. Now, in regular written music, that dot means to play something staccato, short and sharp. But in the number system, it just indicates a beat. Sometimes you will see people use a note. You might see that. And that's often enough to show that. In other cases, you might see this, actually using the note values, borrowing from traditional musical notation. Or we might just go back to using the dots or the slashes, and you see something like this. Three counts of a 1 chord, 1 count of a 4 chord. 3 counts of a 5 chord, 1 count of a 4 chord. Now, remember that this system was invented in a time where country music was really very simple. You didn't have a whole lot of complicated chord changes most of the time. You had pretty much 2 or 3 rhythmic feels that a song would have. I mean, it would be, well, no, it wouldn't be that. Or maybe it's a waltz. But more or less, there were just a handful of possibilities of what it might feel like. And so you don't have to have a whole lot of flexibility in how you show rhythm, because all you have to say is waltz time, and everyone would know what that means. You say two-step beat, everybody would know what that means. Modern music, modern country music, modern Nashville, obviously has so much more pop in it now. So there's different rhythmic patterns that we come across that we need to be able to indicate. So, for example, one of the most common ones is what most musicians elsewhere in the country might call an anticipation, which is when you have something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, where the chord changes on the offbeat. 1 and 2 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 4. The Nashville term for that is a push, and that's indicated like this, with a little arrow. Now, here's another example of something that has a meaning in regular music notation. In regular music notation, this is an accent, meaning that you would hit that chord harder. In the number system, this is a rhythmic anticipation, or as I said, a push. And that just means that this chord has been pushed over, so it happens a little earlier. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So that's very simple. If something's more complex than that, then you will find people using the actual rhythmic notation. So you might see, for example, something like this. Now you have to read music to know how that works, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. I left one out. So if the rhythm is any more complex than a straight count or a push, then you need to actually put those figures in there. And you'll see examples of that in the charts in this book, some of them easier to read than others. As a rule, Chaz's charts are the clearest, but I'll just kind of go around with this so you can see. Here's the rhythmic notation. And you notice that he put a box around the places where he's using rhythmic notation, because he's highlighting that fact. Also kind of just separating it. It is indicating measures. So we have the bam bam, bam bam, bam bam, bam. bum bum, bum bum, bum bum, bum. Again, if you don't read music, that doesn't have a whole lot of significance, but most players that I know read at least some, and they at least read rhythms, because that is the thing you see the most. You're not reading from sheet music when you're working in a recording studio. That hasn't, I mean, unless you're working in a string section where there's something orchestral, or a horn section where you've got multiple horn players and everyone's got to have their part. Those things will be written out, but past that, you don't see written music in a recording studio on any kind of pop music session. So something like this allows you to put at least a piece of that in there, but you're still dealing with the numbers, you still have the flexibility of being able to change keys. And you're still dealing with the way that most musicians do comprehend music, which is through those relationships. And then notice down here at the bottom of the page where it says lick. Well, these are not meant to be chords, these are meant to be single notes. But he's using the numbers to indicate the notes of the scale. And then he put a little star, and that means that happens here. So if the lick goes, if we're in the key of G, and the lick goes 4, 5, 6, 1, here's the G scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that means it's going like this, 4, 5, 6, 1, just taking the notes from the scale.